I always thought the worst moment of my life would be losing my dad, but I was wrong. The worst moment came later, at the lawyer's office in downtown Portland, when my own mother placed her manicured hand on the will packet, looked directly into my eyes, and said with a coldness I had never heard from her before, "You won't get a single cent." And even now, months later, I still don't know if it was the shock of her words or the quiet satisfaction on her face that broke me more. Because this wasn't a normal family argument or disappointment or misunderstanding. This was a punishment, a betrayal I never saw coming, and as I sat in that leather chair across from her, 23, barely out of college, drowning in student loans I took out because she told me we couldn't afford help, I felt the ground shift beneath me like something irreversible had just snapped. The room smelled faintly of old paper and warm coffee, but everything inside me froze as my mom repeated, "Do you understand, Aaron?" And I wanted to ask her why, to beg for an explanation, to demand the truth, but the words wouldn't move past my throat, so I only nodded while the lawyer, a gray-haired man who had handled my father's estate for years, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, clearly uncomfortable as he flipped to the next page, explaining the distribution. The Portland house, worth nearly $1.2 million now, going entirely to my mother. The mountain cabin, something my dad and I had built memories in every summer, going solely to my mother. The savings account, investments, stocks, over $5 million in total, all transferred to my mother. And finally, a single line at the bottom, to my daughter, Erin Rose Caldwell, I leave no financial assets at this time. I didn't even know wills could be that cruel, that blunt, and for a second, I wondered if my father had really written this or if someone had changed it before signing. But then I saw the signature, his handwriting I recognized from every childhood birthday card, shaky and fading because he had been sick for so long, but unmistakably his, and the grief of losing him slammed back into me so hard my chest tightened. I remembered holding his hand in the hospital, promising him I would graduate, make him proud, keep our family together, but sitting in that office, looking at my mother, I realized she was the one tearing us apart, and she didn't care. She never made eye contact when she was guilty, but today she stared straight at me like she wanted me to feel this, to absorb every ounce of the humiliation she was inflicting. And I hated that I still craved a reason, a hint, anything that made sense. I finally managed to whisper, "Why?" But she only folded her hands neatly and said, "Your father trusted me to decide what was best," in a tone so dismissive it didn't sound like the woman who used to braid my hair or sit with me during thunderstorms. The lawyer shifted again, obviously wanting the meeting to be over, and as we stood, my mom reached for her bag, looked at me as if I were a stranger she pitied, and said, "You need to learn responsibility, Aaron," before walking out as calmly as someone finishing brunch, leaving me and the echo of her words behind. I sat back down, dizzy, feeling every part of my life unravel, and the lawyer finally spoke, gently. "Is there anything you want to ask?" And even though I did so many things, all I could force out was, "Did my dad say anything for me?" Because the idea he left no message, no note, no goodbye, felt like a knife. The lawyer hesitated, which immediately made my stomach clench, then said, "There was a letter, originally included, but your mother asked that it be removed since she said it was meant for her," and something in that phrasing felt off, wrong, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture I knew. Dad had always been careful with his words, always clear with his intentions. If a letter was meant for someone, he labeled it always, so why would he include something meant for her in the packet addressed to both of us? I asked to see it, but the lawyer shook his head, explaining he couldn't release something without my mother's written approval unless it was directly assigned to me. I left his office with my heart pounding, my thoughts spiraling, and the Oregon rain pouring so hard it soaked my clothes in seconds, but I barely felt it as I walked through the downtown streets, replaying the moment again and again. Her face, her voice, the way she didn't even pretend to be sad about what she'd done. When I finally got home to my little rented studio off Hawthorne, I collapsed onto my bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, and for the first time since my dad's death, I didn't cry, I boiled. Anger, confusion, betrayal churned until I could barely breathe. I grabbed my phone, typed out a message to her. "Why did you do this?" But deleted it before sending because I knew she would ignore it or, worse, respond with something condescending. Instead, I opened the one thing I'd been avoiding all week. The voicemail from Dad left the night before he passed. I had been too afraid to hear it, too afraid it would break me more, but now I needed his voice, needed anything from him since my mother had stolen everything else. When I hit play, his voice came through weak, raspy, but undeniably his, and he whispered, "Aaron, sweetheart, if you're hearing this." I didn't get to say what I needed to, but listen to me carefully. Don't trust everything your mother tells you, and whatever happens, look in my blue box. Before the message cut off into static, I sat upright, heart racing so violently I thought I might pass out. Blue box? I hadn't heard him mention anything about a box before. I tore through my tiny apartment, searching through drawers, closets, even under the sink, but nothing. The blue box wasn't here. It had to be at the house my mother now owned and would never let me enter again. I sank to the floor, clutching my phone, replaying the last sentence over and over. Don't trust everything your mother tells you. And the pieces finally, terrifyingly, began to shift into a new shape. Dad hadn't disowned me. Something else had happened. Something my mother didn't want me to know. Something she was hiding. And that letter, the one she removed, could be the key. As I sat there, a plan formed in my mind, reckless and desperate. I would get into the house, I would find the blue box, and I would uncover whatever truth my mother had stolen from me. But before I could even think through the details, my phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number that made my blood turn to ice. "He trusted the wrong person, Aaron. Be careful who you think is the enemy." I must have read that message 100 times, sitting there on my cold apartment floor, the words blurring and sharpening depending on how hard my pulse slammed behind my eyes. "He trusted the wrong person, Aaron. Be careful who you think is the enemy." At first it felt like some sick joke, maybe a scam number, maybe someone who knew about my dad's money and wanted to stir chaos, but the timing, the tone, the way it referenced trust. It felt too personal, too calculated, too connected to everything spiraling around me since the will reading, and I couldn't shake the idea that whoever messaged me didn't just know me. They knew parts of this story better than I did. I typed back, "Who is this?" But the message wouldn't send. The number didn't exist when I tried to call it either, like it vanished after texting me. I threw the phone onto the bed, panic and adrenaline mixing in a way that made my hands tremble, because between the voicemail from Dad about a blue box, my mother stripping me of my inheritance, the missing letter, and now this anonymous warning, the truth suddenly felt like a bomb waiting to go off, and the terrifying part was, I didn't know which direction to run. After pacing for nearly an hour, I forced myself to sit and think logically, something Dad always said I excelled at. And the pieces lined up in a way I hated. If Dad left something important in a blue box and Mom was hiding it, then the only place it could be was the house. But breaking into my childhood home in Portland's wealthier West Hills neighborhood wasn't exactly straightforward. Especially with my mother being the type who checked every camera twice and called the police on our old neighbor once just for accidentally stepping onto our driveway while turning around. But I also knew her patterns. Her routines, her rituals, the things she never broke even after Dad died. She always had her Wednesday night charity board meetings downtown, the ones she used more as social hours than actual service, and if she still attended them, Then tonight, she'd be gone from 6 to 9 p.m. It was currently 4:12 p.m. I had 3 hours to plan, travel, break in, search, find a blue box, and get out before she returned. If Dad trusted me enough to leave me a hidden message, then I needed to be brave enough to follow it. By 5 p.m., I had forced myself into motion, tying my hair back, slipping on dark clothes, grabbing a flashlight, gloves, and the old spare key from my jewelry box, the one my dad secretly gave me when I was 16, just in case Mom ever changed the locks and forgot to tell you. He joked, though now. Considering everything, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. I drove through traffic, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, and the closer I got to my old neighborhood, the more memories hit me. Dad grilling on summer evenings, Mom yelling from the patio about HOA rules, me sitting under the maple tree doing homework while Dad hummed old 70s songs. All memories that once felt warm now felt like glass pressing into my throat. As I turned onto our street, the house stood exactly the same but felt entirely different. The lights were off, the driveway empty, the windows dark, but something about the silence around it made my skin crawl, like the house itself knew I didn't belong there anymore. Still, I parked 2 houses down, walked through the side yard, and slid the old key slowly into the back door lock. My heart almost stopped when it clicked open smoothly. She hadn't changed the locks. That alone sent a ripple of suspicion through me. Why wouldn't she change them? Why wasn't she afraid someone might come looking for answers? The idea that maybe she wanted me to find nothing, or wanted me to find something that benefited her, flashed through my mind, but I pushed it away. I stepped inside, every floorboard squeaking like it was calling out my presence, and the smell of lemon cleaner hit me instantly. Mom always cleaned aggressively when she was hiding something or angry or preparing to lie, and I silently prayed this time it wasn't all three. The living room was spotless, staged almost, like she wanted it to look magazine perfect for anyone visiting, but my eyes drifted to Dad's study, a place my mother never truly liked, a room she always kept locked after he passed, because going inside hurts too much, she told me, though I doubted she ever shed a tear in that room after his funeral. The doorknob felt cold in my hand, and when I tried the handle, it opened without resistance. Strange. That door used to always be locked. Inside, everything was untouched, like a shrine. The oak desk, the books on military history, his framed photo of me from 5th grade, his model ships, and yet something felt off. It was too neat, too arranged. Dad was tidy, but not this curated. The books were alphabetized. His pencils were sharpened. He never used pencils. Drawers were empty except for a few irrelevant items. Someone had cleaned this room out, not preserved it. My stomach twisted. I knelt and checked under the desk, behind the bookshelf, inside the cabinet, but no blue box. No documents. No hidden letters. Nothing that felt like him. As I stood to check the closet, I accidentally knocked over a framed photo, and when I picked it up, I noticed something odd. The back was taped shut. Dad never taped frames. With shaking hands, I peeled back the tape, removed the backing, and behind the photo was a folded piece of paper, not the blue box, but something. My breath caught as I unfolded it. It was a handwritten note from my father in his unmistakable handwriting. If she sees this first, everything changes. Be careful who you trust. Check the attic sunflower beam. I stared at it in disbelief. Sunflower beam? What did that mean? Then I remembered, when I was little, Dad painted a tiny sunflower doodle on one of the attic support beams as a secret symbol for me because I used to sneak up there to read during storms. He called it our sunflower beam. I sprinted upstairs as quietly as possible, opened the attic door, and climbed the pull-down ladder. Dust swirled around me, thick and glowing in the light of my flashlight. The attic was cluttered with bins full of holiday decorations, old furniture, random junk, but I scanned every support beam until I found it. A small sunflower drawn in faded yellow paint. My heart raced. I ran my fingers along the wood, searching for anything unusual, and then a hollow sound. A false panel. Dad had built a hidden compartment. With shaking hands, I pried the panel open. Inside was a small blue metal box, scratched, old, locked with a tiny latch. My breath caught. I found it. Just as I reached for it, footsteps echoed downstairs. My blood froze. She wasn't supposed to be home. It was only 7:10, 2 hours early. Then I heard her voice. "Aaron," she called, her tone sharp, cold, echoing through the house in a way that made my heart slam against my ribs. "I know you're here." She shouldn't have known. She couldn't have known. How did she, unless someone told her? Unless someone warned her I'd come looking. The anonymous text. "Be careful who you think is the enemy." My hands trembled around the blue box as she climbed the stairs, each step slow, deliberate, hunting. I clutched the box to my chest and backed into the far corner of the attic behind a stack of old bins, praying she wouldn't see me, praying she didn't know which beam Dad had marked. She stopped at the top of the stairs. Silence. Then her voice, calm, chilling. "You're making a mistake, Aaron. There are things you don't understand. Things your father shouldn't have dragged you into." I squeezed my eyes shut, heart screaming. Her footsteps moved closer. She was searching the attic. I held my breath. The blue box felt hot in my hands. Heavy. Important. Dangerous. Then she said something that made the floor drop out from under me. "He didn't tell you the truth about me, did he?" She stood at the top of the attic ladder with a silk scarf knotted around her neck and the same expression she'd worn the night the paramedics came for Dad, a face calibrated to grief but cold as winter underneath. And when she said, "He didn't tell you the truth about me, did he?" the words landed like a slap and ricocheted through the rafters. Because in that moment, every careful plan I'd made to be brave folded up and leaked into the dark around me. I wanted to step out from behind the boxes, to fling the blue box onto the floor between us and demand answers, but the sound of her voice made me small and careful instead, so I forced my mouth to work past the pounding in my ears and said, "He left me a message. He told me not to trust you. He said to look in the blue box," and for a flash her face wavered, not the brittle control but something raw, almost pained. Before she steadied and smiled like a blade being sharpened, "Christopher left 100 things for you to follow like a breadcrumb trail, Aaron, but the one thing he didn't understand was that men like him think in legacies and ledgers, not consequences." And when she used his name like that, my father's name, something inside my chest clenched because the person I'd loved and the person who'd set this chaos in motion were being pulled apart by the same woman who now stood a single flight of boarded wood away from me. I pressed the blue box to my chest and asked, voice quieter than I meant, "Why did you remove his letter? Why did you make it say I get nothing?" Her eyes clouded, and for a terrifying second I thought she might cry. But then she took a breath, dropped the mask, and said, "Because there are things you don't understand about him, Aaron. There are debts and promises and men who don't like secrets, and he thought hiding money would keep you safe. He was wrong. Money makes people brutal when they want what you have." And the attic seemed to spin as she spoke, as if the rafters were leaning in to listen to that confession. I wanted to throw the blue box down and run, to leave the house that had been my cradle and our prison, but the evidence of his voice, the scratch in his recording, his desperation, made me stubborn, made me think of the nights I'd sat by his hospital bed and promised, and I pressed on because whatever she was protecting me from had not been the truth about the will, but the truth about his life. "You're talking in circles," I said. "When he told me to check the blue box, he trusted me. If you cared about me, you wouldn't have blocked his last words." She laughed then, soft and without humor. "You always were the stubborn one. You think love means sharing every secret? I loved your father, Aaron, but love doesn't excuse recklessness. He almost killed us with his loyalty to men who dress themselves like philanthropists. Do you have any idea what he was involved in? The offshore accounts, the clients who showed up in late-night dinners, the cancellations of contracts when he wanted to be charitable? He made promises he couldn't keep, and when the money dried up, he did something stupid. He made deals with people who kept score." I felt the blood drain from my face because my father had never been the kind of man to fraternize with, well, whoever she implied. "What are you saying?" I asked, and she took a step down into the attic, closer, the wood creaking under her shoes like a metronome. "I'm saying he was involved with people who would not hesitate to hurt whoever stood in their way. He was trying to be generous, but he was also careless, and his generosity put a target on this family, on you. When he told me about the letter, the one he left, I begged him to let me handle things. I begged him to let me take control instead of giving away our future to strangers. He refused. He trusted his moral compass instead of protecting you. I couldn't accept that. So I changed it. I protected what we had left." The logic she offered, the twisted armor of her decisions, felt like a foreign language, but a cold, needle-sharp clarity began threading through me. If my father had indeed been entangled with people who counted favors and ledger lines and threats, then withholding money might have been her way of burying the bait, removing the bright prize to keep me invisible. Yet the way she said it, "I changed it," meant more than protection. It meant control. I pressed my thumb to the box's latch like I might pry something else out of its metal, and I asked, "Who told you to be judge and jury? Who made you think you had the right to decide my future like this?" She looked at me for a long time as if measuring my strength, then stepped closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hush. "I did this for more than us, for you. There are people, men, who collect handshakes and favors, Aaron. They collect people. Your father thought his money could fix everything. He was wrong. There was a meeting years ago in the back room of a steakhouse downtown. He came back shaken and quiet. He said he'd made a mistake and they wanted repayment. He begged me to sell the house, liberate the assets. He wanted to pay them off and secure your safety. I refused. I told him we would not be their bank, and when he kept pushing, I made him promise to do the right thing, but he wouldn't walk away. I promised him I would take care of you in a way that would make him proud, but I never planned to stand aside and watch those men circle you like vultures." The attic air tasted metallic. I should have been relieved that he had tried to shield me from harm, but instead I felt tricked. My autonomy plucked from me by the very person who should have given it. "So you took his money and his power, and you used it to punish me?" I said, and the way she flinched at that hurt was a small, human thing, a slip of softness a parent rarely lets themselves show. "This isn't about punishment, Aaron. It's about survival. He made enemies and debts, and when he started to die, people got greedy. I changed the will, because leaving you nothing makes you invisible to them. Without inheritance, you are not what they want. With money, you become a target. That is the ugly truth." I could hear the tremor in her voice, and for a second I almost believed her, my mind toggling between rage and gratitude like a switch that refused to settle. But then the text from the unknown number. "He trusted the wrong person, Aaron. Be careful who you think is the enemy," flashed in my mind, and the shape of a different possibility emerged. What if this wasn't only about external enemies, but also about secrets inside our home? My father's mistakes were vague and heavy. My mother's protection was absolute, and absolute often means someone is deciding everything for their own reasons. I remembered the taped photo backing I'd found at his study, the hidden note. "If she sees this first, everything changes. Be careful who you trust." Check the attic, sunflower beam. The sunflower beam had led me here, to the blue box, and the blue box, weight heavy between my palms, felt like the fulcrum upon which everything turned. I forced my voice to be steady, to be what I wanted Dad to hear if he were sitting here in his chair, and I said, "If you were protecting me from those men, then why destroy his letter? Why not give it to me with instructions? Why silence his last words?" She closed her eyes, and when she opened them the shame was visible, because his letter exposed more than threats. It revealed the names of people who had come looking for anything tied to him. The less anyone knew, the safer you were. "I couldn't risk a note becoming a map," she whispered, but the way she said the words made them sound like excuses issued against the dark, and excuses are brittle when you stand on them. My anger turned into something sharper then. The suspicion that there were things she hadn't told me at all, about Dad's involvement, about whether he'd willingly signed the will the way it read, about whether my mother had taken steps beyond mere alteration. Had she forged? Had she coerced? Had she done whatever it took, and then smiled while she buried the truth? "Open the box, Aaron," she said suddenly, soft as if passing me a benediction. "I don't want you to find anything that will hurt you more." I nearly laughed at the performative kindness in that line, but my hands did what my head wouldn't. I opened the latch. Inside, wrapped in a handkerchief, lay a small stack of papers, a key on a chain, and a folded photograph of my father and me at a county fair. Sunlight caught in his smile like proof he'd been happy once, but beneath that photograph laid something that shoved the air out of my lungs. A single page bearing Dad's handwriting, penned weeks before he died, listing names, accounts, and one short sentence written huge across the bottom. "If anything happens to me, Aaron must have truth, no matter how dangerous." Below it, someone had scrawled in a different hand the words, "Redacted. For her safety." My eyes snapped up to my mother's face, and in hers, I finally saw the thing I'd been trying to recognize all along. Fear, yes, and love, yes, but also the quiet, terrible satisfaction of someone who believes the ends justify ruining everything in the middle. The attic seemed to tilt, and in that tilt I realized that whatever I did next I would be doing alone. Because the blue box had given me proof that Dad wanted me to know, that his voice in the voicemail had been real and urgent, and it had given me proof that my mother had made a deliberate choice to silence him, and that choice had been meant to save me or to bury me under her version of safety. I folded the papers back into the handkerchief without touching the scrawl, letting the key clink against the metal, because that key, like the sunflower beam, like the blue box, like the voicemail, was now the hinge of everything. And as my mother said in the attic with the streetlights spilling through the eaves like accusation, "If you go after this, Aaron, there will be consequences." I stood up slowly, heart a jagged drum. And for the first time since his hospital bed, I felt the fierce, brittle determination Dad must have felt when he left me that message. I would have the truth, no matter how dangerous, because I owed him that much. And because I was the only one left to decide whether our family's secrets would bury me or set me free, I didn't move at first. I just stood there in the attic with the blue box pressed against my chest like a second heartbeat, listening to the wind rattle against the shingles while my mother's breathing broke the dusty silence in small, uneven waves, and I realized with a sick, sinking clarity that whatever was inside this box was worse than either of us wanted to admit, because the moment I saw her stare at the note, the one with Dad's handwriting and the word redacted in someone else's ink, her eyes didn't look confused or angry. They looked haunted, like she was finally seeing the ghost she'd been running from for years, and that ghost had my father's face. I felt something sharp twist in my stomach as I unfolded the rest of the documents inside. Bank transfers, wire logs, encrypted emails, a handwritten confession from Dad marked, "Not for Aaron until necessary," and as I scanned them, my hands trembling, I realized something horrifying. Dad hadn't been the innocent, loyal man she claimed, nor the reckless idealist she hated. He had been both good and dangerous, generous and desperate, a man who tried to buy safety with secrets and bought silence with borrowed favors, and the worst part, the part that nearly made me stagger backward into the far wall, was a page with two signatures, his and hers, a contract between my mother and the people he owed. Proof she willingly worked with them behind his back, proof she had negotiated my safety in exchange for something far darker, something that made her whisper, "Aaron, please don't read that," in a voice I had never heard from her, cracked and terrified and suddenly very, very human. I felt the air shift as I said, "You said he made bad deals. You said you were protecting me," and she flinched like she'd been struck, whispering, "I was protecting my child. But he wasn't trying to protect you. He was trying to save himself," and as the words left her mouth, the final page slid out from beneath the others, a letter addressed to me, dated 6 weeks before he died, written in pen strokes jagged and frantic. "Aaron, if you're reading this, then I've failed to keep you away from the truth. Your mother and I both made mistakes, but neither of us deserves forgiveness. I kept you in the dark because the men I owed would have used you. She kept you in the dark because she was afraid you would hate us both. The money isn't safe. The legacy isn't safe. You aren't safe if you stay. Leave the house. Take the key. Follow nothing either of us promised you. Build a life that is yours and yours alone." The page ended abruptly with a shaky line. No signature. No goodbye. Just a command that felt heavier than every lie combined. Leave. My throat burned as the truth sank in like ice water. Dad hadn't been warning me about Mom alone. He'd been warning me about himself, about the mess he'd made, about the monsters he'd invited into our lives, and Mom, instead of pulling us out, had bargained with those monsters, offering them something in return: silence, cooperation, the inheritance wiped clean, the illusion of a family with nothing valuable left, nothing worth taking, except me. The key in the box suddenly felt heavier, so heavy I thought I might drop it, and I asked her, barely choking out the words, "What did you promise them? What did you trade for my safety?" My mother's face crumpled like paper under fire. She leaned against a beam as if standing hurt, whispering, "I told them if anything happened to him, they could take everything. All the money, all the property. But they had to leave you alone. They agreed. They signed it. But then he made that voicemail. He left you that blue box. He told you to look. He broke the agreement." My heart slammed so hard against my ribs I felt nauseous. "So you changed the will," I whispered, "not because you hated me, but because you were terrified they'd come after me if they thought I inherited something." She nodded slowly, shaking. "I knew they were watching. I knew they were checking. If you looked like a liability, they would have taken you too. So I made you look worthless, invisible, uninteresting. I kept you angry at me because angry children don't snoop. I did everything I could to keep you from becoming leverage." I stumbled backwards, dizzy. I didn't know whether to scream or collapse, because the truth was a trap with no good exits. My father, who I adored, had dragged us into a world he thought he could outsmart. My mother, who I feared, had sold our entire life to keep me alive. Both of them had lied not out of cruelty, but out of survival, and both had destroyed me anyway. I didn't realize I was crying until she stepped toward me and I recoiled, the betrayal still raw in my veins, and she stopped mid-step as if the distance between us had become a wall. "Aaron," she whispered, "if you run now, they won't come after you. They already think you have nothing. Let it stay that way." But Dad's last words, "Build a life that is yours." pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat that refused to die. I looked down at the key in my hand. An old brass key with a number etched in the top, 312. I dug deeper in the box and found a hotel address written beside it, a storage suite in a private facility in Seattle. Something he'd left outside of their reach. Something he didn't trust her with. Something unfinished. Something meant for me. My mother saw it at the same moment and went pale. "You can't go there," she whispered, voice trembling. "You don't know who's watching. You don't know what they expect." "Aaron, listen to me. If you follow his path, you won't come back the same." But it was too late. The truth had already changed me. The girl who walked into this attic was looking for an inheritance. The woman standing here now was looking for answers, for freedom, for the right to know who she was beyond their lies. I backed away with the box in my hands, and my mother didn't chase me. She just watched with a face full of love twisted by fear and guilt and resignation, whispering, "I hope one day you understand why I had to become the villain in your story." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I climbed down the attic ladder, walked out of the house I used to call home, and for the first time, the silence around me felt honest, painful, brutal, real. And as I drove into the night towards Seattle with nothing but a key, a box, and a truth heavy enough to fracture the world I thought I knew, I realized something that shook me more than anything. There are worse things than being left out of a will. Being written into one full of lies can ruin you far more. And whatever waited behind the door that key unlocked, it was the final piece of a story my parents never wanted me to finish, but now I would. Alone. Free. And ready to know everything they died trying to bury.